Koeraad also very specifically mentioned about music, specifically Hindustani classical music, and said that Islamic music or Islamic culture had a great influence on Hindustani classical music. What is your take on this?
Well, you see, the distinction is made in Indian music between Carnatic music, which is more pure Hindu music, and so-called Hindustani music,
Devotional.
India. And well, let me say first of all, the single greatest performance that I've heard in my life was of Carnatic music. Of course, I rarely go to concerts and so on, so you know, my opinion is not so important as a musicological opinion. But it just so happens that, you know, Carnatic music really appeals to people, including even me. So if that existed in India, that was already quite enough. And so no Muslim contribution was needed. You see, assuming there was one, at any rate, native Indian music was good enough. And you see, even today, Indian classical music persists. You see, I know something about Chinese and Japanese civilization. Well, there you see their classical music is a museum piece. You see, East Asians win the Elizabeth violin and piano and so on play. And so they're good at Western classical music, at performing it at any rate. But their classical music is just a museum piece. It's just for tourists and it's not taken seriously anymore. Whereas Indian classical music is very much alive. So you see, Westerners also recognize that it's in a way superior. It's very much worth preserving. So that music existed already before the Muslims came. And so that goes back to the Sama Veda or so. So it's very ancient and very native. They couldn't contribute much to that anyway. Now, I don't know very much about Hindustani music, about how it came about. So let's assume that there is a Muslim contribution. Well, then it only happened in spite of Islam and not because of Islam. Because Islam itself is one of the rare religions that are against music. You see, it is impossible to imagine Johann Sebastian Bach without Luther, or Gregorian plain chant without the Catholic Church, or Chinese music without Confucius. But in the case of Muhammad, he was dead against music. He closed his ears when he heard a musician play. And so Orthodox Muslims, like Emperor Aurangzeb, which is in India, or Ayatollah Khomeini, also prohibited music. So if there was any music, well, yes, Persians, Turks and so on had a musical tradition, and maybe they contributed something to the Indian style, but at any rate they did so in spite of Islam and not because of Islam.
The other point that flows from this discussion is education. From my understanding, India was a center of great learning. We had several great universities, some of them international in nature, because students from all over the world, known world at least, used to come and study various subjects. They just suddenly they just vanished, got extinguished over a period of time. The classical case is of Nalanda, which was destroyed by Bhaktiar Khilji. Now, while Hindu and Buddhist universities were extinguished, did these Muslim invaders institute any colleges and universities which promoted science and secular studies?
Well, you see, education in India had its own history, apart from Islam. Like Takshashila University probably perished because of an earlier invasion which had nothing to do with Islam, as far as we know. It already predated the Buddha because contemporaries of the Buddha had studied there. So it's very much a Hindu achievement. But somehow, it did not continue to flourish. But in the case of the Buddhist universities of North India, we do have a record And there we know very clearly that Islam destroyed them, because they were centers of pagan learning. So they leveled the buildings as well as their inmates, so to speak. I mean, it was a big massacre and a big arson. So nothing remains of these. And in fact, the campaign of Muhammad Ghori and Bakhtiyar Khilji at the end of the 12th century destroyed most Hindu temples and buildings in North India. You know, the only ones that remained were those that were a bit out of the way, like the Khajuraho temples or the Mahabodhi temple, which of course is in the forest. It's at the site where the Buddha achieved enlightenment, which was under a tree in the forest. But otherwise, you see, most temples, most buildings, most public buildings were destroyed. So that is Islamic contribution to India. You know, it's a wholesale destruction. And then you see, did they bring something to replace it? Of course, you see, they built the Taj Mahal and so many other buildings. But again, you see, for that they had to destroy first the Hindu buildings. But in terms of education, it is very clear that they did not replace what was there. You see, there are theological academies where they study the life of Muhammad and the sayings of Muhammad. But anything comparable of secular sciences, there you see India suffered a big setback when Islam came.
How did education and development of science survive in this environment in India? Did it regress? Did it progress at a slow pace, or did it
well, it certainly suffered regression. It you know, preserved the existing tradition to some extent, but it ceased to be creative. You know, it's a very bad time for Hinduism. You know, in some pockets, like in Kerala, the sciences still flourished, but at a lesser pace than before. And already Al-Biruni, writing in about 1000, says that, you see, the Hindus are dispersed and are retreating before us, and therefore also hate us inveterately. But at any rate, you know, while an admirer of the Indian sciences, he notes that they are declining, that they are suffering badly because of Islam. And that was never replaced. You see, already, of course, Islam itself was past its prime. In the first centuries, Islam used the existing sciences of the Greeks, of the Persians. And there was a certain flourishing of science in Islam, which could best be considered as the last flourishing of Hellenistic science. And most of the people there were freshly converted, or not even converted, were Christians and Zoroastrians.
Buddhists maybe in some cases. Even Buddhists in some cases.
Yes, and when Islam really took over and started molding society more profoundly, this flourishing of science stopped. And so that's also when Islam conquered India.